Picture this. You wake up one morning feeling absolutely exhausted, emotionally volatile, and like your body is staging a full rebellion against you. Then, a few weeks later, you feel unstoppable, energized, and sharp as a razor. That is not random. That is your menstrual cycle running a 28-day biological program in the background, and most people have never been given the actual manual for how it works. So today, we are fixing that. Everything you need to know about your menstrual cycle in 8 minutes. No fluff, no shame, just the biology. Let us start with the basics. The menstrual cycle is not just about bleeding once a month. It is a full hormonal operating system that controls energy, mood, skin, libido, metabolism, and even how you think. It runs on 4 key hormones: estrogen, progesterone, luteinizing hormone, and follicle-stimulating hormone. And these 4 chemicals choreograph a cycle that is divided into 4 distinct phases: the menstrual phase, the follicular phase, ovulation, and the luteal phase. Each one has a completely different hormonal fingerprint, and once you understand that, everything about your body starts making a lot more sense. Phase 1 is menstruation. This is the phase most people associate with the entire cycle, but it is actually just the opening act. It begins on day 1, which is the first day of actual bleeding, and lasts anywhere from 3 to 7 days, depending on the person. Here is what is actually happening. The previous cycle did not result in pregnancy, so estrogen and progesterone, which had been elevated, both drop sharply. That drop is the trigger. The uterine lining, which had been building up in preparation for a potential embryo, is no longer needed, so the uterus contracts and sheds that lining. Those contractions are what cause cramps. The prostaglandins released during this process are essentially the biological signal telling your uterus to squeeze. Higher prostaglandin levels mean more intense cramping. Meanwhile, your hormone levels are at their lowest point in the entire cycle, which explains why energy and mood can feel depleted during this phase. Your body is essentially resetting. Phase 2 is the follicular phase, and this is where things start getting interesting. It actually overlaps with menstruation, beginning on day 1 and continuing until ovulation, typically around day 13 or 14. The pituitary gland in your brain releases follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH. As the name suggests, this tells your ovaries to start developing follicles. Each follicle is essentially a tiny fluid-filled sac containing an immature egg. You typically start developing several at once, but over the course of this phase, one follicle becomes dominant and outcompetes the rest. As these follicles grow, they produce estrogen, and this is where you start feeling noticeably better. Estrogen is your builder hormone. It rebuilds the uterine lining, yes, but it also increases serotonin sensitivity, which improves mood. It supports cognitive sharpness, and it gives you a genuine energy boost. Many people notice that they feel their most motivated, social, and mentally clear during this phase. That is estrogen doing exactly what it is supposed to do. By the end of the follicular phase, estrogen peaks dramatically, and that peak sends a signal to the brain that triggers the next event. Phase 3 is ovulation, and it is the biological centerpiece of the entire cycle. When estrogen hits its ceiling, the pituitary gland responds by releasing a massive surge of luteinizing hormone, LH. This LH surge causes the dominant follicle to rupture and release the mature egg. That egg then travels down the fallopian tube toward the uterus. The window during which that egg can be fertilized is surprisingly short, roughly 12 to 24 hours. However, sperm can survive in the reproductive tract for up to 5 days, which is why the fertile window is generally considered to be the 5 days leading up to ovulation, plus the day of ovulation itself. During ovulation, many people notice a slight increase in basal body temperature, a change in cervical mucus which becomes clearer and more stretchy in texture, and often a noticeable uptick in energy and libido. That is not a coincidence. Your body is biologically signaling peak reproductive readiness. Evolutionarily speaking, this is the main event the entire cycle has been building toward. Phase 4 is the luteal phase, and this is the one that generates the most questions and, honestly, the most frustration. After ovulation, the ruptured follicle transforms into a structure called the corpus luteum. This structure begins producing progesterone, and progesterone is the dominant hormone of the second half of your cycle. If the egg is fertilized, the corpus luteum continues producing progesterone to support early pregnancy. If no fertilization occurs, the corpus luteum breaks down after roughly 10 to 14 days. Progesterone has a very different vibe than estrogen. It is your calming, stabilizing hormone. It raises body temperature slightly, reduces gut motility, which can cause bloating, increases appetite and cravings, and generally creates a more inward, lower energy state. Estrogen also rises again in this phase, though not as dramatically. Toward the end of the luteal phase, if pregnancy has not occurred, both estrogen and progesterone begin to fall, is what triggers premenstrual symptoms, often called PMS. Irritability, fatigue, breast tenderness, brain fog, and heightened emotional reactivity, all of these are downstream effects of that hormonal withdrawal happening in real time. Now, here is something genuinely useful to know. PMS is not just psychological, it is a neurological response. Progesterone metabolizes into a compound called allopregnanolone, which typically has a calming effect on the brain by acting on GABA receptors. But in some individuals, fluctuating levels of this compound during the late luteal phase actually trigger anxiety and mood disturbances rather than calming them. This is thought to be one of the mechanisms behind premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PMDD, which is a more severe form of PMS affecting a smaller percentage of people. So what controls the entire rhythm of this cycle? It is called the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, which is essentially a continuous feedback loop between your brain and your ovaries. The hypothalamus releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which tells the pituitary gland to release FSH and LH, which tells the ovaries to produce estrogen and progesterone, which feeds back to the brain to regulate how much FSH and LH gets released. The system is elegant when it is working, but it is also sensitive. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, and cortisol can suppress the entire axis. Significant undereating, extreme exercise, and disrupted sleep can all interfere with this signaling chain and cause irregular cycles, missed ovulation, or absent periods entirely. Here's the part that most people never get told. Your cycle length is not rigidly 28 days. That is a statistical average. Normal cycles can range from about 21 to 35 days. What matters more than hitting a specific number is whether your cycle is consistent for you personally. Significant variation from one cycle to the next, or cycles that are consistently very short or very long, can sometimes indicate hormonal imbalances worth investigating. And one more thing before we wrap up. Tracking your cycle is one of the most underrated health tools available to you. Not just for reproductive planning, but because the hormonal patterns throughout your cycle affect your energy, your recovery from exercise, your cognitive performance, and your emotional landscape in predictable and meaningful ways. The follicular and ovulation phases tend to favor high-intensity effort, social engagement, and creative output. The luteal phase tends to favor rest, recovery, and more focused solo work. Working with those patterns instead of against them is not a gimmick. It is applied biology. Your menstrual cycle is not an inconvenience. It is a sophisticated biological system giving you real-time information about your health. The more you understand it, the better equipped you are to actually work with your own body. If this gave you even one useful insight, share it with someone who deserves to know this stuff too. And drop in the comments which phase you want a full dedicated deep dive on, because this is just the overview. Each one of these phases could fill an entire video on its own.